All right, well, welcome to the first of the multi-series book club. I'm excited to see old and new friends, and I'm Lynn Langett, and we are going to be covering this book, Data Mesh, for efficiency, because a very large number of people respond. Do is just people introduce themselves the first time they make a comment. You know, taking a bunch of introductions, because we have that in the Slack as well. A comment, do a little introduction, something like this, and I'll just give an example. I'm Lynn Langett. I'm an independent cloud architect. I have a 15-year history in big data, published 3 books on the topic. Here to understand this emergent concept of data mesh, but particularly around the domain I work in, which is genomics. So that kind of thing. I'm going to start by sharing, and let me get sharing here. And top resources. Obviously have the book. In addition to that, we have Slack. Join Slack. LinkedIn, send me your email and I'll add you to Slack. We also have a repo, and I'm very happy just to make you contributors. We have a specific page called Bookclub, and if you want to put your name on here, just go ahead and add your name in the same format. You don't have to. You can just read this, but if you want to be a contributor, you can be a contributor. I'm going to make sure I'm not being muted again. Okay, good. Just because it's the Zeitgeist. And I'm testing this as well. I thought it would be kind of fun to open, you know, kind of in mind humorously, what are the 3 concepts of data mesh from ChatGPT 4? And you can see it's domain-oriented ownership, data as a product, and self-serve data infrastructure. And then because I just got access to Bard, you know, we have to try things out, right? Looks like we're pretty similar, even though it's the new hot stuff. So we have to go beyond the AI, which is my little sort of tongue-in-cheek that that's all the AI is not for us, and it's not for me. So we have to drill in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get started, and the way I read is like this, and I'll just make this full screen. And hopefully everybody can see that okay. Can somebody just tell me if you can see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Somebody
yes,
can see it. I'm hoping so.
Yes, we're able to see it.
Good. Okay, awesome. Okay, so this book has an interesting and I think significant prologue, and so I'm going to focus on that as the beginning of our discussion. So what I do when I read is I like to highlight, and so you're going to kind of see how I learn too. And at points that I would love to have a little bit of discussion, I'm just going to pause and give my 2 cents worth and then kind of open it up to the group so that we can have discussion. The goal for this week is to present it in the prologue and, you know, really start to get to know what each of us brings to the group. So when I started working with this book, and I have read it all the way through once, which, by the way, I'd recommend. I don't know, it's the way I approach book clubs. I read the whole book through once and then go back again. Everybody has their own way of learning, but that's what I do. Okay. One of the things that is throughout this book is the example that's provided. The concept of data mesh was originated by the author of this book, who is a consultant at a company called ThoughtWorks, at a talk that she gave a couple of years ago. And there was so much interest that she continued to develop the idea, and she really is kind of the center of this potential new direction in data management. And she's very cognizant of the fact that she does not have all the answers, that this is a potential new direction based on her work with many different clients. So what she focuses to help make things as concrete as she can at this early stage in her thinking is to come up with this idea of a business, and the business is Daphne Corporation, the fictional audio streaming. So one of the reasons I highlighted this is one of the things I'm hoping to get with the group is a little bit broader perspective in terms of use cases. Almost every data use case is an e-commerce transactional website, which you have to start somewhere. But I would like to go beyond that. My particular use case, as I mentioned, is genomic data or human health data, which is very different than this use case. So one thing I'm looking forward to is having discussion about these ideas for use cases in addition to the one presented. And actually, I'm just going to pause there and maybe just ask if somebody else has a use case that they are really interested in including in addition to genomics, and introduce yourself when you first talk as well. Anybody have a vertical working in or an area that they're interested in applying this technology?
I can go. For me, I think it's probably not a particular vertical, but this particular concept and some of the concepts in this book, which really resonated for me, I've been trying to apply in various companies that I've worked at. Mostly startup through, I'd say, like your small enterprise, right? So I think where this idea is applied is an example of a very nimble, forward-looking, decentralized company, at its core, right? So I think where I've gotten the most resonance within the organization and the most success is companies like that. But then looking at companies who maybe are still going through that transformation and also taking a leap of faith with data, right? Which they always consider to be different, right? So that's, I think, my area of interest, more in the kind of organizational maturity and size versus a particular vertical.
So I'm Jason Miles. I'm a principal consultant with Nudesic. I've got kind of two verticals of interest. I do a lot of work now with finance, and I've got a long history with K-12 education. And I'm always looking for how data can be better used in that group that is where my heart is.
I'll chime in. My name is Matt Penner. I'm the Director of Technology for a K-12 school district. Jason's a colleague of mine from several years. I have two verticals. One is just education in general. We are typically understaffed, over expectation, and no one really cares about the data until the state or some federal mandate requires us to. And suddenly at that point, people start to dive into it, but there's very little data governance. Data is certainly not thought of as a product. And so IT is typically the deliverer of data, but we're not close to it. And the question is always, well, why isn't it doing this? And it's, of course, those reverse questions. IT gives the data that's there. There's very few people who understand it. We're starting to branch out into that realm, but we've got a lot of different disciplines. There's obviously student achievement. There's discipline. There's special education. There's all kinds of places where we could see data being used as a product. And I would love those departments to take that on. And then just from a general corporate organization, we're doing a lot with automation, but a lot of our roadblocks are because the individual departments don't think of their data as a product. So human resources, for example, we've got a lot of data that we're trying to migrate and merge with fiscal and user accounts and everything else, but human resources has not been typically treated that way. So they track humans as they need to, whether they're credentialed, they're background checked or something else, but beyond that, they don't track the data that payroll cares about, and they don't ask the questions that IT cares about. And so I remember, a year ago, one of them said, this isn't the district's data, this is HR's data. We only track what we care about. And we had to elevate that mindset. And so the idea that our HR department, just to use them as an example, a lot of our departments are learning how to do this, would treat their data as a product. This is human resources data. This is data of every single person that works in the district that anyone can make use of, whether you're payroll or IT or something else. I love that concept. And so I would put us squarely in the old school traditional data silo mindset. And I can't wait to see how we can apply some of this. This is near and dear to my heart.
Cool. I keep going here a little bit.
I think it's appropriate for me to jump in right after you, Matt.
Okay.
I'm Benny Redden, and I have an HR aggregation and analytics platform that takes data from disparate HR systems, things like applicant tracking, core HR, benefits, et cetera, aggregates that into one data model, and that is then used for analytics and visualization. What I'd like to do with data mesh, though, even though I'm already treating data as a product, I would like to see how data mesh can, in essence, release the data from the central kind of management that I'm doing here and put that into a much more democratic capability for people to define, use, and extrapolate using their own data sets.
Great. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to keep going here a little bit. And we were just getting started with the use case of the book. And for those of you that just joined, what we're doing is we're introducing ourselves when we make our first comment, just to kind of keep it moving. That this is based on an e-commerce kind of situation. So then she goes on to talk about this key aspect that I'm seeing. So I do primarily work in genomics, but I've worked in data for 15 years or so. So I've worked in fintech, I've worked in ad tech, I've worked in education, and a trend that is vertical specific by adoption, in my opinion, is machine learning. But now in genomics, it's ubiquitous. So it makes the implementation of new data strategies more challenging, particularly the level of machine learning that I'm working with. And this has been accelerated by COVID, actually, because there was an unprecedented level of global coordination because of the crisis of the pandemic. And that accelerated what's possible, but put pressure on improving data management. So one of the things I thought was important on this page was data mesh is a new approach to harnessing value from analytical data at scale, emphasizing the difference between transactional data and analytical, even though that's a concept that we all are very, very familiar with, way back when OLTP and OLAP, right? So transactional and analytical data warehouses. I think it's important to differentiate that when we are educating our people who'd be implementing data mesh, that the idea here is around analytical. So it excludes transactional. I mean, obviously that would feed the system, but it's not for that. And then she goes on to talk about cultural readiness of organizations that can start exploring data mesh concepts. And I thought this was very well written.
You went muted there, Lynn.
Yeah, Aaron.
Your microphone is muted.
Oh yeah, that's weird. It is, isn't it?
It keeps auto muting me, which is like the weirdest thing. Yeah.
Technology is only good when it works.
I don't know why. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about these prerequisites that I highlighted in red. And just if it auto mutes me, I won't use this equipment on the next one because it's annoying. Sorry. I was trying to have a better quality, ironically. So let me bring this up. Okay, so for the domain prerequisites, the cultural prerequisites, which are very important. As she says, they're a culture of data, curiosity, and experimentation. I find that a lot of my customers don't have this. They have a culture of data silos and data sort of stewardship, sort of like you have to, well, literally you have to make a ticket request to get access to data for some of my customers. So that's kind of the antithesis of that. So the key idea, I think, is experiments. And then she goes on in the middle there to talk about meaningful, trustworthy, and secure data, and that everyone has an expectation of this availability of data. And then again, she talks about machine learning, enthusiastically applying machine learning models. I find that even to this day, machine learning is overhyped. Dig in, a lot of logistic regression still out there, even though TensorFlow's been around for a really long time. So I always like to ask the question of, are you doing machine learning? An example of 1, 2, or 3 machine learning models that are providing value, so I can get a sense of the maturity of the machine learning. And again, she emphasizes data culture before data mesh. We all know that every new technology, it's the technology and the people, right? Because people make the technology and use the technology. Just as when I, many years ago, was building data marts and data warehouses, and that was a relatively new concept. That the cultural prerequisites are key in discussing even a POC for data mesh and the DBA. I can talk about DBAs who are, unwilling to change. They want control over their data, and I think it's a key part of any sort of paradigm shift. So then she is talking specifically here about what is existent in this example, and she's talking about pretty deep domain knowledge, which is not only important to understand what the specific things that she's going to suggest, but I think it's significant in that it's so well understood, documented, literally has it on one page. And all of us who work in data know that to get this accurate, this concise, this can be several months of work. So I have a customer I've been working with for a year now, and I don't think I have it quite yet. So, again, when you're looking at new paradigms, I feel like this is like the clean data set that feeds into data mesh in some way that doesn't exist. And so that's why I highlighted this. I think it's well written. I think that level of detail is important, and I would use it as a template. So I'm actually going to pause there and see if anybody else had any thoughts on what I've discussed so far, and particularly this page. So I'm going to pause.
I have one thought. If you could go back to the page, it was about I actually highlighted the same. I'm a highlighter too. By the way, I'm Elliot Cordo. I forgot to introduce myself last time. So I'm a data person. Have been for a few decades. So the one was the about alignment of objectives, right? That was a passage that really struck me, and I think one of the impedances I found in like trying to do something like this inside of organization is that I think teams, talking about like a data product or an analytic product, they're going to be, I think, a little more prone to successfully share data and like collaborate or acknowledge the requirements of somebody else if there is an alignment, right? Their outcomes are aligned somehow. But I think something which, at least not in this section, and I did the same thing, I read the whole book first, that I think is worth exploring is, what do you do when they're not aligned, right? And you're a general producer of data, and your job is to like produce those beautiful data sets for everyone who might need them. Like that's a different type of alignment, right? That's higher up in the org. So that's one thing on that page that you had highlighted that I definitely thought a lot about.
Awesome. Anybody else have any comments?
I want to introduce.
Go ahead, Varshna.
No, hi, I'm Varsha. I want to introduce myself first. I'm a database administrator, so skilled with Oracle, SQL Server, now Hadoop. Exploring data is my passion. Big data is the new challenge, which I really like to handle and see how does it go and what are we exactly doing to do that, and what exactly are we calling big data, why it is big. And now when we talk about, my recent, my experience was with the healthcare development unit. So they are basically the manufacturer of all the surgical kits. So I realized that they do have data, and it's obviously they are producing kits for like 24/7 in different zones of work. They are getting it, but understanding the governance is pretty much important. What I was doing there, I was just organizing. I was getting the manufactured data detail and then the financial detail and everything into the data warehouse. But when I was just trying to introduce the policy for the governance, it was involving lots of sensitive data, financials and everything. So there's a reluctance. They do understand that it should be organized, but the reluctance is, why do we need it? It's just we are using it. It's just within our organization. We don't need many policies over it. So I guess right now when we are thinking about such things is definitely giving us a good idea to implement. It is creating a mesh, which I understand in a general term right now, because lots of data, but of course is sorted and then giving the meaningful details to the user is our job rather. But protection is the one thing which I found is really important, because many growing organizations are still taking time to understand how and why. First question is why. We are secure. It's just us. We are using it. It's just nobody else that is within organization. And people who are already working, they do not have access to the systems. Then what is the point? Why you want us to do this? So, I tried convincing. I was failed. Of course, it's not easy. Change is definitely not easy. This is what we all know. But yes, gradually they understood when I started telling them that how and why there is a need. Not today, maybe when it's just you, and because they all are like 15, 20 years old employee in the same positions and then growing within organizations. So probably they're very comfortable,
Yep.
that it's just us.
So what I have found,
Yeah.
really good points, is in data classification, which is an important part of mesh. I have found that there's kind of two areas in terms of protection. First, if there's regulation, that's helpful because people have to comply to regulation for patient data, for example. The other side, what you talk about, where there's just familiarity, there's no regulation, that is a very common problem of it's good enough. Don't prevent us from doing our work. There are starting to be integrated tools. I tend to work in the cloud. I work in the cloud, basically, that find sensitive data easier. I had an example, and actually Kelly, who's on the call, worked with me, of a customer who was moving a POC to production, and it was for financial, and they needed to comply, and they thought they knew where the sensitive data was, but we were able to use cloud-based scanning tools to quickly identify where the data was, which was helpful in classification, categorization, and compliance. But that's getting really below the level that we're starting at. It's important, and it's a part of figuring out data products, right?
Yeah.
But we're starting even higher than that, which is grouping the data by as a product, which thinking the security classification could be part of driving that, like making separate products. And so how I see that as being relevant for that. So, okay, anybody else before I go on here? Go ahead, Norman.
Yeah, hi, Norman Owens. I work in the cloud. I work for AWS. My interest here is that we have something called a lake formation, which we sort of put out there as this will get rid of silos, put it all in one place where everybody can see it, use it. Practically speaking, what I saw during COVID was one of my customers wound up with 11 different data lakes because they couldn't figure out how to do the governance and sharing. And so in effect, the data lake became just a much bigger silo, a way of managing higher volume. So what interests me about right now is working through this. I appreciate that she comes at it in a sense from a history of science point of view, like that paradigm shift and how she applies it here. But there's something that popped up to me in the prologue here, which was, Conway's theorem that eventually, if you have an IT structure, it will perfectly mirror your business organization. And it seems like she's leaning into that with these business units as the ones who understand the data domain. They seem pretty interchangeable to me right now as I'm sort of working through this. So I'm interested to see how small or large, how do you define a data domain? Because it might just be a business unit. And then I think the problem that the data mesh is solving at that business layer level is, well, how do we share faster, easier? So again, trying to break down a silo, but in some ways leaning on different silos to say, you're compact, you're going to own this whole thing yourself, like a silo organization might. But the requirement is you've got to be able to share it because the removal of friction is what a data mesh has to provide.
It's just microservices for data, but then I think it's bigger than microservices, but smaller than silos. So data services, right? Where's the boundary, right? How small is it? And governance, to Varsha's point, will help you to figure out the boundary, because I'm familiar with lake formation. I've actually done some POCs with it. If you guys aren't, it's AWS set of services for data lake governance. And again, one of the reasons I'm so interested in this topic is I too got with customers that made multiple lakes and it became ungovernable. So I thought, okay, data mesh, is that like groups of lakes? Is that really what? So that's something I've been thinking about. So, okay, I'm going to keep going here. Good discussion, sir. I'm loving it. All right, so let's see. Talking to us. And let me make it full screen so we don't have to look at ourselves. And then, all right, we're talking about defining the domains. And then green is what we want to get for value. So in the span of a few hours, we want to enable, the goal here is data accessibility for use that is decentralized by domain. It's a product, and we can create self-serve data platforms that are appropriately governed. The nirvana, that's why we're doing this. That's what we want to get to. And then she has this, I think I really like the illustrations in the book, useful illustration. This reminds me very much of domain-driven design for application development as a starting point, getting the domains defined. So then we get into the red, things that we have to have. So work before the mesh. An AI team. Notice AI again is in there. Request access to the data from the centralized governance team, data engineering team, and then her company, their functionality divided organizational design and technology was not yeah, so that was not conducive because that's to the point I was talking about Conway's Law, which is your organization structure will produce your software structure, or in our case, your data structure. And then they were functionally divided. So sort of the classic thing, monolithic architecture, and it was a bottleneck. So this is kind of where we all are now. So to that point, where I am now is I work entirely with data lakes because of the genomic scale. Even though I wrote 3 books on SQL Server, I haven't used it in 5 years. So, things change. Not that it's not a great product, but for the scale of data. And again, that's one of the reasons I'm particularly interested in this. So maybe we'll just do a quick go around here so we can see what everybody's working with. So I'll kind of give a little bit more detail here. One of my clients, not the one I have right now, but oh gosh, it was before the pandemic. They were one of the biggest users of the Google Cloud in the world. They were putting 45 terabytes per day into the Google Cloud. They actually broke Google data centers. So when I talk about huge volume, I'm not joking. And what is going on now in my world is something called multi-omics, which again was really accelerated with COVID. I'm actually working on a project right now with Mayo Clinic, and it's aggregating data with image data that is increasingly specific. It's actually called spatial multi-omics because now they have geospatial coordinates. So think of it, single cell level, multiple types of analysis. So, one of the reasons I'm here is because I'm on the data frontier. We don't even know how much data we're going to possibly have going down to the single cell level. So let's just go around the horn here and just, I don't know, I'll just piggyback on the next person. Since I haven't talked to Mike Bankovich in like years, I'm so glad to see you here. We used to work together. So I'll ask Mike to start.
Yeah. My role has been diving into, cloud governance and more, enabling these kinds of teams to be able to go out, whether it's building in Azure, building in, whatever it is, containerization, diving deeper into a lot of the domain-driven approach for this stuff. So, I'm coming at this by virtue of, kind of taking the mindset of the agile continual delivery of things and then merging that with, the domain-driven event storming and other stuff. So that's kind of where I'm coming at this from. And I've got a couple clients I'm working with to do that. Don't have terabytes of data yet, but I was working with some DNA stuff and images from that at a previous client. But that was during COVID when we were trying to solve it. So, and now that that's done, they didn't need it anymore.
Cool. Call on somebody else. Let's go around the horn here.
Yeah, let's go to Joel. You are.
Am I unmuted?
You are.
Awesome. My name's Joel Hewlin. I've done some work with Lynn in the past. We're both partners with Soliance. Let's say I've been in the industry for 28 plus years. A lot of that as a developer, but a lot of that in the data space as well. And so, Varsha, you had said something that I thought was interesting in that you're figuring out the meaning of big data. And it's one of the things I've thought about a lot because it's not just volume. That's what most people think about, because then it's like, well, what number do you pin that on? Is it in the terabytes? Is it petabytes? And so it's not just volume, it's also velocity in which the data comes in, like streaming stuff. It's also a variety of like, structured, unstructured, semi-structured kind of stuff. And what I've been working with a lot lately is on the unstructured and semi-structured side, some of that in large volumes of data as well. So one of the projects that I'm working on is news related, pulling in thousands and thousands of articles a day, processing them, using NLP models, doing all sorts of stuff on the ML side against that data, as well as analytics, storing it all in the data lake. And then in some cases, I mean, there's a bit of data engineering involved too to refine that data, and also lands in the data lake, but then some of it ends up in databases for like semantic modeling. Yeah, it's kind of your traditional modern data warehouse. So to me, what's interesting here about data mesh is, I think what a lot of you talked about already is around data governance. With projects that I work on with customers, in that regard, especially around the data engineering side, is you see a lot of that fragmentation, those silos, because governance is a big thing, or because just a matter of that's how they know how to lock things down from a security standpoint, right? So I'm just curious about where this is headed. I haven't had a chance to read the prologue of the book because I just found out about it today. So unfortunately, I didn't have time to get that far, but I'm just enjoying what I'm listening to so far. All right, I'll pick on Jason.
You're muted, Jason.
Well, that isn't very helpful, is it? Yeah, I'm kind of coming from the same place as Joel, with a variety of different clients and different architectures, and I'm just trying to figure out where I can use data mesh to really serve my clients, not just from a technological standpoint, because I think that data mesh is, and you hit on it earlier, Lynn, culture. Because I'm coming into a lot of these organizations, and a lot of organizations have what I would call high analytical maturity within their business units, but low trust between their business units. And so you have an organization that their IT department can deliver incredible capabilities. But then on the other hand, the other departments don't trust the IT department to deliver those capabilities on time. Or you've got a group that is doing, in some cases, groundbreaking work in a particular subvertical, but nobody else knows about it because they're afraid to share it, and their colleagues are unwilling to use it from kind of a not invented here type situation. And so reading through the book, one of the things that struck me was that the book was almost less about a technology and more about a culture. And so I really want to learn more about how I can help my clients embrace that culture and that mindset. And yeah, let's kick over to Varsha.
Yeah, I really want to understand one thing, because all of you have got different now client challenges and everything. So when these days people say specialist, IT specialist or data specialist, and people are given multiple tasks to perform, I really suspect on the privacy of data. When I have access of Hadoop, I have access of data warehouse, and as a person where I am, because I'm taking up as a client, and they are expecting me to do this and this and this. I'm really worried about, like, if my team has got, like, say 10 IT specialists, like these days they are now just putting up people in this way. So I am giving access to Hadoop warehouse, or maybe my traditional now transactional database, access to all 10 people just because they are IT specialists. But their work is defined. They're not supposed to do everything everywhere every day. I really want to understand, in this scenario, where do we trust because these days data security is something which is turning up in a very, very high pace, and we are getting breach news like every other day. It's so very common. And sales and finance and everything is like, we do have, it's like everything is online.
That's a great point. And again, interestingly, some of these new cloud tools provide masking, which is something that I've used with clients. It's again, you raise really, really practical, great points, because if you're creating these multifunctional teams and suddenly people who did not have access to the data are having access to production data, how can they work with it, right? And it requires new paradigms and new thinking. So just to be complete, and since another person I haven't seen, just a second, Norman, I'm just going to call on Kelly to give her perspective. Sure. I'll come back to Norman. It's like old friends here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly. I work with clients with a lot of different needs all the time, from startups to large enterprise clients. And so I am curious about this next kind of paradigm shift. Obviously, siloed information is an issue for a lot of clients. And then also, what is the ramification? We have the data mesh. What's the ramification for all the other infrastructure elements to the system? And how do all those pieces interwork? I like the idea. I'm kind of swimming with the idea of the business reflecting on the data design piece. That sent my mind kind of down a rabbit hole of reflection on the companies I've worked with and the team dynamics and the levels of fear and the levels of distrust and the levels of, there's all sorts of stuff there. So I am very much looking forward to the rest of this book.
Awesome. And Norman, you had a comment?
Varshna, that I'd recommend this book on data privacy. But the thing that I found really interesting that he proposes is maybe data should be considered a liability, especially if you don't have security. And it caused me to think about, are there ways that you could avoid ever having PII data in the ways that now we avoid ever having credit card data? And, back to your point, Lynn, there's enough ways to obfuscate it. Could you get away from the whole thing altogether?
Yeah, so something I'm showing all my customers are these new cloud services, and Amazon has it as well, and Azure has it as well, that they're not aware of. The Google version is called data loss prevention, and you can do ad hoc scanning, you can do masking, you can do de-identification, you can set up scanning by policy, and then there are specialty services, and I'm most familiar with healthcare. So the patient record standard is called the Fire Server, and part of the cloud vendor's Fire Server offerings is to provide de-identification of the data sets for downstream research. So there's starting to be tools available to address this problem of data masking and data privacy. The area that I'm finding is my clients are not aware of these, and so they don't use them. They write scripts or something, if anything. So again, excellent point. But I'm going to keep going. So because I'm a kind of a go through the section that we are going to committed to go through here. So let's keep going. And let's see if I can bring this up. Okay. Am I not muted? Can you guys hear me?
All good.
Yes? Okay.
We can hear
you. Okay, great. Okay, so invisible form and policies. Again, she's to what we've been discussing. She's talking about who are identifying your domains. Then the key experiences in this mesh work is building, deploying, monitoring, and evolving the data products, and then working with a mesh of data products as a whole. And again, focus on the user, which is, fundamental agile practice for all of technology development. That's something that all of us consultants in business, because if business technology had time, the technologists had time to focus always on the users. They would never need consultants. So I find myself constantly when I go on engagements, getting the users and listening to the users and interviewing the users for whatever we're building. So this is not new to me, and I think just from our conversations, it's not new to people that are participating. And this aspect here, minimize the cognitive load in data sharing and experimentation. This is literally my world right now. As we're moving to the cloud and we're having new paradigms for data storage, moving from traditional SAN-based file storage to buckets, properly understanding the usability issues when you change the underlying data structure and minimizing the cognitive load it's fundamental to adoption. It's fundamental to usage, and it's often ignored. Okay, they'll just understand, and they don't. And then limitless scale with autonomous data products. Again, I care about limitless scale because of genomics. One of my kind of the flip side of moving people from constrained either on-prem or colo resources and moving to the cloud, that move is the first step in limitless scale, which is a powerful driver when you have true big data, because you have users that are in pain. And unfortunately, pain is, in my experience, a key driver of change. So I'm sorry that a lot of my users are in pain, but I would say the general situation in bioinformatics is waiting. When I switched from working in fintech and ad tech to bioinformatics, I really thought that the users were making fun of me when they told me that their workloads took not hours, but days or weeks or longer. And that's how much challenge there is in this domain. Like I said, I've been working in data. It seems like all of us have a long history here, 15, 20 years. And I've never seen anything like this in terms of the mismatch between the resources that are needed and what people have. So why transform? Well, in this case, bottleneck, but in my world of genomics, because of the advances in data collection, again, I'll just share, I don't know if anybody has looked at this, but there's many pieces of information put out by NIH showing that the advances in sequencing, capabilities of sequencing and cost of sequencing is increasing with the classic hockey stick. And we will start with sequencing everyone's DNA, but the next level is what's called single cell RNA, which one of my clients is working on reference data at the cellular level for people. They can't even tell you how much it's going to be. So the expected outcomes, rapid growth and increased complexity, getting value from the data at scale. And the way forward is really basically core agile, which is repeating cycles of explore, expand, and extract. So that's the vision. That's why we're all here. So the question is, how do we take the first step other than reading this book? So in my case, I have been drawing because that's what I do. I start with pieces of paper and draw architectures. And so in addition to the repo that I made for this group, I have specific work on GCP that I will put links to in our repo, where I am drawing some conceptual diagrams to start to talk to my end users about that page with all the blue, like what are my data products for my particular customer? Because I think that for me is a starting point. Minimum viable data product, if you will, to take an agile approach to it. And with that, I'm going to pause and kind of ask if anyone has anything that they're thinking of as a starting point if they actually want to experiment.
I can make a quick comment. So I think in the last two organizations, I've been trying to mine the synergies of, kind of distributed architectures, distributed development, microservice development, event-based architectures, right? So I think likely as the next steps, it will be continuing to, kind of harness those synergies and try to leverage some of the muscles that organizations have built around those. Um, so I think that is probably my immediate focus in terms of this exploration.
Well, while you're thinking, I'll add something too. I am a builder, right? And so as I'm testing, I will start building on the cloud. And so the clouds that I'm working on right now, just because you can't work on all of them, is AWS and GCP. And so Google has a set of services called Dataplex, which is designed to support data mesh concepts. And as mentioned, Amazon has Lakehouse and some other newer services. So yeah, I'll let Norman fill in because I'm not quite as up to date on AWS, but I literally would want to start to do a bake-off because that's how I would learn, and I'll share all that as just open source. So go ahead, Norman.
Oh yeah, and nothing I'll ever say is NDA or it's all publicly available. But AWS announced Data Zone, which was specifically around how do you create an abstraction layer where data owners can create their own catalogs for data consumers, and the technologists below that level don't have work to do. So you can see the vision of data mesh in some ways. It's a lot about the governance, publish the catalog. All that being said, it's not ready for preview yet. So
Yeah, I think as I think about the AWS ecosystem, which is where I mainly work, there are some supporting functions there, and as I think about like harnessing, what exists to make some progress here, I do think about like lake formation as it exists. I think about schema registry, right? Especially as we're talking about event-based architectures, that one is probably the one that I think very closely aligns with a lot of, kind of the ideas around data distribution and sharing. So yeah, but I'm excited about data zones too, but I think it'll be some time before it's fully realized, and probably something that matches closely enough to what our clients need.
Cool, and I'm not going to put them on the spot, but I'm going to mention that I know that Joel and Mike work a lot with Azure, so if you guys happen to want to play around with Azure, we'd love to see. No expectations. But...
Yep. I'm going to push Azure.
In terms of our meetings, I'm sorry I had to bump around a couple of weeks, but I just had some other commitments. Mm-hmm. So it's my book club. So if nobody else wants to lead, I will lead. But I think that we get a better result if we have a rotating leadership, because as you can tell, I'm fully capable of talking for hours at a time. But the point is for all of us to discuss. So Norman, if I understood correctly, you were going to maybe take the next one, the first chapter. Is that what was that? Yeah. Okay. Yep. Okay. So for the next one, I'll start the meeting and record it, and then Norman will just lead the discussion. And then you guys can think about if you would like to take a chapter, the expert learning together. It's really just so that we benefit from everybody's knowledge. So, and I'm the worst offender of being talking too much. So.
Oh, but I may compete with you next week, Lynn. So we'll see. And in fairness, I have a willing but potentially unfortunate University of Minnesota senior who's on an independent study, and we're working through this as well. So it's I really appreciate the chance to practice some of my lectures if you guys don't interrupt.
For sure.
I guess Lynn's idea is to make everybody capable of speaking that longer now.
Okay, well, we've got 4 minutes left. Does Does anybody want to add anything as we kind of wrap up the first session? I really appreciate all of your time, and I look forward to collaborating.
I would love to listen everybody's any challenging situation until we meet next, which is promising, and you are, maybe if you're fighting for the solution, we all can at least think of something, or maybe at least I can listen. I would love to. This is something very, concepts are here. How we are implementing, how we are transforming, that is a major chapter. That's what we have to read, actually. This is what I was just thinking of. So, I mean, all of you are just onto the practical grounds and see, you're battling, see what comes there and how you are, beating it. And at least we can listen. Maybe just 5 minutes for it.
Sure. Great. Anything else?
Are we going to see any demos of this?
Well, I would intend to show things that I have built. But the book does not include any specific technology. Like when I ran quantum programming, what we did as we got into it, that one had a toy library, and we had like a JavaScript web UI to start, but we found limits, and so then I went into the cloud vendors, and then everybody else kind of did it too. So the answer is I'm not sure anybody else is. I'd love it though. I mean, not to put it in spot, Mike, but I'd really love it if you did some Azure, because I would love to get up to speed on that. And we're learning. So this isn't like some polished thing. This is like learn in public, kind of like this is how far I got, and this is what made sense, and this is what didn't make sense. So if you want to, because one of the other things is it makes a little, like Varshan was saying, it makes the concepts a little more concrete, right? Like what can we do today, right? So it's really kind of up to you. Go ahead, Matt.
I would say I love the idea of concepts because of practical demos, and I'd love to see it between GCP and AWS and Azure. We're an Azure shop, but Lynn, I was in your quantum computing one, and their tool set was neat. And I think it explains some of the concepts, but when you started to show the real world vendor applications, all of a sudden it made some of those really theoretical ideas come down to, solid ground. And what I appreciated too is, especially this book is still talking about technology that doesn't exist yet. And I'm still trying to find, we've all talked about data catalogs that are instantly consumable by the business team with no data knowledge, right? And those never really came to be. So how is this any different? I have ideas on how it is, but relating it back to the demos, when you started to show a real for-profit vendor's tool for quantum computing and the neat tools they built in, it was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Now I see how your tool really is geared to solve this problem, not just a whiteboard where we can scribble all over. I'd love to see the vendor's tools because I'd like to see, which one is a little further along in making this actually something usable. Removing that cognitive load is a very lofty goal, and some vendors do it really well and some don't. So I'd love to see that.
Cool. Well, I'll keep that in mind, and we'll think about that as we rotate as well. I want to be respectful of time, so we are at the first hour. Again, thanks. It's great working with everybody, seeing everybody, and we will see you when the next one comes. And Norman, thank you in advance for agreeing to lead the next one. So see you then.